author, columnist, managing editor of LibertyNation.com, podcast host and conservative policy advocate.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
The national pastime of watching politicians self-destruct their own careers may be coming to an end. Not because our noble leaders are more moral or unsusceptible to foibles and corruptions, but rather due to a full frontal protection pattern in favor of the current White House occupant. Welcome back to Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. And on today's edition, we have our special LN News panel to dissect whether the classified documents fiasco at the feet of the 46th president is likely to be an exclusionary factor in the 2024 elections. I want to take a moment to say a special thank you to our listeners out in Cadillac, Missouri on WATT 1240 AM and 106.1 FM. Thank you for being here. Remember, this show is proudly sponsored by LibertyNation.com, where you can access podcasts, breaking news, analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. He's going to prison. That was the rallying cry of the left when former President Donald J. Trump was exposed as possessing classified documents. But for Joe Biden, well, according to the White House and the Department of Justice, it's a whole different ballgame, apples and oranges, if you will. We're fortunate to be joined by our exclusive Liberty Nation panel with Mr. Tim Donner, Liberty Nation senior political analyst, Jeff Charles, host of Right On and author, and Scott DeCosenza, LN's legal affairs editor and host of the excellent Uprising podcast. Gentlemen, thank you for joining the show. Today, I really want to kick things off with Tim here, talking about the classified documents debacle. And Tim, it seems to me that the whole left-leaning world is determined to defend Joe Biden. Now, is this really in the interest of the American people? Because it seems to me that the coordinated effort is far more damaging to the public's trust in government institutions. What do you making it?
Well, I think the hardest thing for people to get their hands around is what constitutes a classified document, why it's classified, when it's classified, how it's declassified. Now, of course, the left wants to point out the differences between Trump because he tried to hold the documents after he was told he needed to give them up. So they try to point that. They try to point to the fact that, well, everybody knows that Trump is a creep and Biden's a good guy. So that's enough right there.
The orange man bad defense.
Yes, pretty much. Pretty much. But the biggest difference is that a president like Trump can declassify anything that he chooses to as president of the United States. The only question being how that's done, but apparently it's done simply by virtue of the fact that the president wants it to be done. So I think the real effect is for the elite media, they've been caught in a real trap here because they really came down hard on Trump. And now Biden does the same thing, arguably worse, because it's in multiple locations instead of just the one, being Mar-a-Lago. But they're going to be hard-pressed, and you could see it on Merrick Garland's face when he announced a special prosecutor, special counsel for the Biden classified documents. He looked like a man who'd been cornered and said, God, I have no other choice but to appoint a special counsel to investigate my president. So it's tough, but the elite media has long figured out how to take similar situations from from a conservative and a left-winger and make one seem far worse than the other. That's really their business, isn't it?
Yeah, we are going to talk about the media later on in the show. But Scott, I want to address something that Tim said here about how a president declassifies a document. Now, you and I, we have discussed this before, the legal implications. And correct me if I'm wrong, but your analysis is that the issues with both Donald Trump and Joe Biden are essentially nothing burgers, but even more of a nothing burger for Trump. Could you explain your rationale on that?
Sure. The simple reason is that the president has undeniable power an unfettered power to declassify any document at any time while he serves as president of the United States. And it's debatable about what distance the vice president can go with his declassification. There are certain documents which we know the vice president can declassify for sure. For instance, documents that he has classified. But for other documents throughout the executive, it's a debatable point. And it doesn't really need to be debated out because we don't really have a situation whereby vice presidents are declassifying things that their presidents don't want, and they have no recourse on how to act or something to do about it. This is not a problem we have faced, and we're not facing that problem now. But on who stands on firmer legal ground, it's certainly the person who was president of the United States at the time they moved or accessed documents, rather than a person who was vice president of the United States at the time they moved or accessed these documents.
Yeah, I think that's something that a lot of people are missing. They're saying, well, he's president now, so surely that's fine, right? But that doesn't seem to me to be the case. There were many years in which he was out of office where he was neither president nor vice president. And I believe that the real issue rests on he was in possession of classified documents whilst not being either of those people. But it does seem, and we have talked about this off camera, that Biden is in trouble now purely because the Biden Department of Justice decided to get political on Donald Trump. Jeff, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is what I've been saying the whole time. I mean, Democrats and the activist media have to be behind the scenes really, I'll just use the word angry at President Joe Biden right now, because he blew up their whole strategy. I mean, once they served that search warrant at Trump's home at Mar-a-Lago last year, I mean, I was thinking, yeah, they're going to be using this. They're hoping to politically damage Trump. I expected indictments. I didn't expect him to get convicted, but I expected indictments, all to politically damage him and prevent him from running for office again. But now that it turns out that Biden did the same thing, even worse, as Tim said, having multiple documents in multiple places, that kind of blows that whole thing up. It doesn't mean that they still won't try, but I think a lot of the air has been taken out of their sails, because if they're going to defend Biden doing what he did, they can't really aggressively or attack Trump as aggressively as they want to. They're still going to try. The media is already trying to make it sound like Trump is just so much worse than Biden, but I don't think that's going to wash. I don't think that's going to play well.
All right, can we do a quick round robin here and figure out just very quick answers? What do we think the end result of the Biden classified documents debacle is going to be? Let's start with Tim.
Well, I think that most likely Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, will string this out as long as possible with as little information as possible leaked. These special counsels go on for years. So I suspect it might really carry past the 2024 election, because if he comes out with findings before the election, it would not be good news for Biden or whoever the Democratic candidate is.
Tim, people could have said that right before the midterm elections on November 2nd, when the documents were first discovered at the Penn Biden Center.
Exactly.
Jeff, your final thoughts on this?
Within a couple days, we will have forgotten about this, because the media will stop covering it until, if and when, the DOJ decides to go after Trump or indict Trump. Then it's going to come up again from conservative media. But as far as the activist media defending Biden, they're going to try to memory hole this one.
Okay, it's the memory hole route from Jeff. And Scott, what's your take?
My take is that this was maybe done in order to help sink a Joe Biden candidacy for the second go-around by people on the left side of the aisle that aren't sympathetic to that candidacy.
Here we go. Conspiracy theory.
That's the highest way I can state. Yeah, there's a potential conspiracy there for it. I mean, if you look at the actual crime, quote-unquote crime, it is a nothing thing. So for his own side to make a big deal about it, all they had to do was pack up those documents and send them back to the White House. He could have put them back in the drawer. Nobody would have been the wiser. But then somebody called in the FBI and created a thing about it.
Well, yeah, I mean, it does make you wonder that CBS was the news organization that broke this, and then they decided to sit on it until after the midterms, which means if your theory is correct, Scott, and I'm not saying it is, but if it were, then they are CBS is fully committed to helping Democrats, but not necessarily the president representing the party at the moment. Now, you're listening to Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio America Network. We'll be back with our exclusive panel after this short break, discussing the two-tiered justice system. Don't go anywhere.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And we're back with our special Liberty Nation Radio exclusive panel of Tim Donner, Scott Cosenza, and Jeff Charles. Earlier on, we talked about the full frontal effort to shield President Biden from damaging allegations. But what of the notion that justice is blind? We hear from Republicans that the DOJ is taking it easy on Joe Biden when they went hell for leather against President Donald Trump. Now, how true are these allegations? And if they are, what does it signify? Now, Scott, as our legal resident mind, or resident legal mind, whichever you prefer, or mind resident legal, entirely up to you, I'd like you to take this one for us. Are we witnessing an unequal application of, if not the law, then at least the processes associated with the law?
Mark, I can't get past your description of full frontal and knowing President Biden's penchant for exposing himself to female members of the Secret Service detail.
Well documented.
In a rut there. I'm trying to all my might to get the wheels out of the ditch here. Would you repeat the question one more time?
Too much information, Scott. TMI.
So, Scott, are we witnessing an equal application of the law or the processes of the law?
So, the funny thing is that once the equal application of the law is demanded, typically that will be the end of the application of the law at all, which is what I expect we will have here. In other words, when Trump is the alleged violator of the law, he gets to have the full measure of justice, good and hard. And then when somebody on the progressive side, it can be subject to the same justice, well, then all of a sudden, it's just about getting the documents back in safe hands, and we never really were serious about, mishandling crimes whatsoever, is what I suggest we'll have. And it is an unequal application, I think, because if it was just Trump, then I think they'd go, as hard as they could. But now that they've got the gander to contend with, it's not going to be the same deal.
So that I take it that's a no. I mean, my legal terminology is not that clear, but I take that one for a no there, Scott. Now, Jeff.
Yeah, that's how you know Scott's a lawyer.
Yeah.
On the one hand, but on the other hand.
Yeah, those $100 words, and I'm not sure how much you billed me for the time. Scott, thank you for your answer. It was a very good answer. But Jeff, how badly do you think this is damaging to institutional representation? I mean, if it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, to many Americans, it's a duck, right? And there may or may not be a two-tiered system, but it really looks like there is. And I think that's an important point. How does America deal with what appears to be a two-tiered justice system?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I don't think this is going to change anytime soon. I mean, even if you go outside of this example, when you look at the conduct of the FBI and how it treated Trump and how it was always after Trump, even since 2016, the Department of Justice has been corrupted, and it's been corrupt for a long time. And it doesn't seem that any president from either party really wants to do something about this. I mean, the FBI has huge issues with corruption, and it's attacked both sides since its inception. The Department of Justice, same thing. There is a two-tier justice system in this country. I mean, even if you get more macro with it, I mean, there's, Hunter Biden can go on TV, talk about smoking crack, and knowing that nothing's going to happen to him. But if any of us did that, not that we smoke crack here at Liberty Nation, but if any of us did that, then we would be in huge trouble. So it's an ongoing problem. Everybody complains about it, but we never get people in office who want to do something about it.
Okay, Tim, it seems to me that the founding principles of America are based on the ideas of liberty and justice, or the two. Let's go back a couple of thousand years to the Roman goddesses, Libera and Justitia, I believe. What's your take on this? Have we moved so far from those old Roman ideals that so well encapsulated the idea of the American dream?
Well, I think what these last years with Trump and after Trump, although there hasn't been an after because they're still after him, right? So it's still something of a Trump era in that sense. The thing we saw really introduced over these years is the criminalization of political differences. And so, for example, Exhibit A, the Russia collusion hoax. That was done because it was criminal in their view for Trump to be aligned in any way or supported in any way or propped up in any way by Vladimir Putin. But what if that person was a left winger who was running Russia? Would there have been a problem if they'd been supporting Hillary Clinton? Would we ever have even known about it? So there is a two-tier justice system. I think it's just a matter of what the two tiers are, because remember, the Department of Justice oversees the entire federal criminal code. So they have to be selective in what they decide to pursue and prosecute. They can't prosecute all crimes, even all big crimes. So they have to be selective. And it's how they select, what they select, that reveals what their true sort of ideological underpinning is, or you might put it, the swamp establishment defensive mechanism that doesn't allow anybody from outside their circle to come in and shake things up as Trump did.
You know, that's a great point about, the election of what crimes there are to prosecute. You think that, if the U.S. attorney in Cleveland goes to his bosses in Washington and says, I think I can make a giant union corruption case, a couple months out before the election, you think he's going to get an enthusiastic, let's go ahead with that? Absolutely not.
Well, and another example is even the abortion issue. You guys might remember late last year, FBI agents showed up at the homes of 11 different people for engaging in a pro-life protest in front of an abortion provider in May of 2021, hauled them off and threw them in cages. And as of today, we still don't have anybody arrested for all the fire bombings and vandalisms that have been carried out against pro-life organizations after the Supreme Court decision on Dobbs. So that's yet another prime example of how the DOJ, FBI politically selects, the cases they want to take. It's really hard to argue that this institution has not been corrupted and politicized at this point.
But for most people, it's an optics issue. Surely,
well, I think that
one of the blind.
Well, one of the big problems is that the Attorney General, who oversees the entire Justice Department, including the FBI, is supposed to be, quote, independent from the president who appoints him or her. But of course, that's not the way it works in real life. The fact is, the Attorney General is, in essence, a political appointee. So underlying permanent bureaucracy, so to speak, is always in a protective mode and has always been left of center in its predilection to protect the existing order. And they can't have anybody threatening that mark.
Perhaps it's time for an elected Attorney General. Right, gentlemen, thank you very much. Coming up after this short break, we tackle the activist media's devotion to the Commander-in-Chief and whether Biden himself remains a viable 2024 option. Don't go anywhere.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
President Joe Biden can apparently do no wrong in the eyes of the Fourth Estate activist media. No matter how many troves of documents get found, he will always be free from guilt, according to the supposed independent journalist industry. But by this point, is anyone really buying what they're selling? We're back here with Liberty Nation Radio with our exclusive panel of senior political analyst, Mr. Tim Donner, host of Right On and author, Jeff Charles, and legal affairs editor and Uprising podcast superstar, Mr. Scott DeCosenza, Esquire. Now, Jeff, the media really is your beat. So what's happening? It seems that every time I think the media in general can't get any more biased or more sycophantic for the Democrats, they just go one step further. And is there a point where even these diehard supporters within the industry say enough is enough?
No, not really. I mean, I think in the case of
That's true.
President Biden, I mean, the only way they would go against him is if Scott's theory is right and they want to have somebody else run in 2024, and they see this as a way to discredit him enough to where he has to step down. Because remember, their allegiance isn't necessarily to the president. Their allegiance is to the Democratic Party. So whatever benefits that party, that's what they're going to do. So I could see a case, I mean, especially if some of them do start going a little bit harder on Biden, because I've seen some here and there that maybe perhaps that they want somebody other than him to run, which, by the way, that would be in line with what most Democratic voters want. They don't want him to run for a second term. So, I mean, I think that theory may have more validity to it than it might seem.
Okay, there is one addendum to that, if I may. I think, as you rightly point out, all the polling suggests that most Democrat voters do not want Joe Biden to run. But I think if they were polled, do you want Joe Biden to run, or do you want a Republican to win, they would still,
well, sure,
en masse go for Joe Biden. And
yeah.
Tim, I wonder if the positive spin by the media is as open and blatant as it is, because the purveyors, they know that their audience almost lives in an echo chamber, or is it something more, do you think, with the imposition of fear and threat? So like if you step outside of the postage stamp consensus, people know they'll be vilified or shouted down. Where do you think that is?
Well, I think there's a real school of thought among leftists that they'd really like to see Gavin Newsom run as soon as possible, because he seems to be the most attractive, articulate, clean and articulate, I think might be the way to say it. Maybe even a credit to his race.
You know, it's racist to say that about a Californian.
Yes.
You know that, right?
He's one of the good ones.
Yes, he's right. But I mean, let's quantify what you guys were just discussing. 57% of Democrats don't want Biden running again. 70% of the country writ large doesn't want him running again. So it's a question of whether this document scandal, I mean, Scott introduced earlier in the show the concept that really someone on the left outed Joe Biden because they don't want him to run again, and this was the only way to get him out because the media wasn't going to attack him on their own. So this was the only way to do it. But look, I think that Biden is a guy who probably was 50-50 on whether he'd run again. Then when the midterms came and his approval numbers recovered from the 30s up to the low to mid 40s, I think he felt the wind was at his back. He felt that he had gotten a mandate from the voters to continue doing what he's been doing. And he felt all kind of, pumped up about running again, like from, I think I'm going to run again, I haven't decided to, almost like, yeah, hell yeah, I'm going to run again. But this takes him down a notch again. Now, I don't personally, necessarily think the fact that he was storing documents, classified documents in a secret location, even figures in the top 20 things that he's done wrong as president. But apparently, even Democrats admit this is a huge problem for him. So it brings him back down to earth, especially when you've got a likely recession coming through all these multiple interest rate hikes. People are going to lose jobs. The unemployment rate's going to go up. The economy is going to slip into some form of recession. So I think this is a precursor for Biden of a descent, possibly to the point where he decides, makes up an excuse not to run again.
But just to come back, you mentioned the numbers there about the amount of people who don't want Joe Biden to run his approval ratings. And I was doing some research for an article for libertynation.com, and I came across some great figures, really delving into the approval ratings of former presidents. So, for example, the final ratings for Presidents Ford, Carter, and Bush Sr., who all have, let's call it, one thing in common. So you had Ford,
one term in common.
Term. So you had Ford on 45%, Carter was on 37%, and Bush Sr., he was on 34%. And of course, they all got wiped out. But
well, wait a minute. What about Bush Jr.? I think he was in the 30s too when he left office.
He was low. He was. But the one that really stands out to me is Harry Truman, who was, they called him a dead president walking when he was on 40%. And then he went on that legendary whistle stop tour. I think it was 240 stops around the country.
Yes.
And that was, I mean, he won, right? He won. He came back from that, and that was quite, that was
Increased
quite the
exposure
turnaround
to the American public is not going to help the Biden campaign.
Well, that's the thing, right? That's what kind of brings.
Well, that they want the opposite of it, and I think what they're going to do, and they're sending out sort of signals that if Biden does run, they will have him sort of sit on the White House porch as the statesman, and they will let all the attack dogs go out there and make the case for him across the country, because less is definitely more when it comes to exposure to Joe Biden. They'll want to make Biden just a commodity, someone who's not DeSantis, not Trump, not Glenn Youngkin, for example, rather than the actual person. And since they've succeeded with that in spades in 2020, why not try it again?
They've already set up the infrastructure for that. I mean, when it became clear that Republicans were going to launch all of these investigations and that they would most likely take back the House before the midterms, the White House and the Democrats have already assembled a team exactly for that purpose, mainly to fend off the impact of these investigations. But I mean, why not also have it also be the attack dogs while Biden sits on his porch or in his basement or wherever he goes to contemplate life? I don't know.
and read classified documents previously removed from the.
Yes,
with the media, Scott. Do you think that what we're going to see, because I'm seeing this right now, and I wonder if you think it will continue, that for some reason, all the big headlines are about Donald Trump when this isn't his scandal. Do you think that will continue?
Well, if the past is our guide, Mark, yeah, Donald Trump gets the clicks. And so they're going to, go back to that well until they mine it dry. So there's still something there.
But he's not getting nearly as many clicks as he once did. I mean, the danger for Trump now is being ignored.
Who gets more? And he's getting more. That's why that's why they're putting his name there. If it were Biden, it would get the clicks.
Well, let's be brutally honest here. Joe Biden is dull. He's been dull for 50 years. I mean, the only time Joe Biden is not dull is when some criminal scandal comes to light. Whether that's plagiarism, all these massive lies that he tells, or the wondrous gaffes that he keeps doing. That's the only time he's of any interest. Whereas Donald Trump he's pretty much interesting all the time, isn't he?
Yes, that's true. Yes. In the Chinese sense of interesting.
So you have to consider the audience for these headlines. It's people who are watching The View or Rachel Maddow. They don't want to read a critical article about Joe Biden. They want to read about how Donald Trump is continuing to be orange and a man and bad, and that's what they're getting.
And listen to whatever Joy Behar says in analysis.
It's all bread and circus from the media. Now, coming up later in the show, we ask the all-important question. Has the document scandal damaged Joe Biden so much that he can no longer run in 2024? Don't go anywhere.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Despite the slings and arrows of his own creation, Joe Biden still looks set to run for a second term in 2024. And no one else is as yet rising to take the nomination. But can he really still claim the mantle as the, and I use air quotes here, best person to lead the party to victory? Tim, I see scandal after scandal, crisis after crisis, and yet still his party, at least on the surface, supports him. What will it take for a Joe Biden downfall? What's your analysis?
Well, look, Joe Biden can make a very strong case that he beat Trump once, and there's no reason he couldn't beat him again or whoever his successor was. Now, if Trump isn't the candidate, which appears increasingly a shaky proposition for the Republicans, then it's kind of all bets are off. Would you want Biden up against Trump? Because as we pointed out earlier, Joe Biden is dull, but that's kind of what got him elected in 2020. Because if you wanted to sort of characterize the last 6 years of public perception of presidents, Trump too strong, Biden too weak, right? So, but that, Biden has said consistently, including before 2020 and after, of course, that he asked the rhetorical question, who else is going to beat Donald Trump? Well, he still believes he's the only one who can beat Trump. But now that Trump isn't certainly the candidate, and Trump sort of creates his own crises, would Biden be a good candidate against a polished, young, professional politician like Ron DeSantis? I mean, that's an entirely different proposition than running against Trump. So I think the Democrats feel they're largely stuck with him if he wants to run, because they don't really have the stomach to tell a sitting president who took down the evil orange man that he can't run again. But they might try to convince him, or, according to Scott's conspiracy theory, they've already done their dirty work by planting or revealing classified documents for their own president so they can force him out and get Gavin Newsom in to run in 2024.
To be fair to Scott's theory here, he didn't suggest that they planted the documents, merely that somebody actually told the media that they had found documents.
Right. Guess what?
Also, I'm not convinced that the people who really run things have settled on Newsom either. So that wasn't an intrinsic part of my theory. I'm open to the possibility that they are, but I haven't articulated that.
Well, I do that by process of elimination, because who else is there? And
there is nobody else.
Don't give me Kamala Harris, because she would lose. She would lose to a lamppost. So
that's because she is a lamppost.
But doesn't that show a distinct? Isn't it dangerous not to run Kamala Harris for the Democrats that for the last 2 years, 2.5 years, really, have been saying that, this a transition presidency, and Kamala Harris is the right person to become the first change of immutable characteristics.
Pete Buttigieg has got to be out of it now because of this these multiple crises. I think she's been relatively quiet the past few months. She might be, she might be the one they've picked.
Well,
see, I don't know. I think they're going to cut their losses with Kamala Harris. I think they expected a lot from her that she did not have the ability to deliver on, and I think they realized this would be a horrible idea. And I think with Biden, I mean, Biden may be the only one who could beat Trump, but I would actually reverse that. Trump is the only candidate that Biden could possibly beat. Like Tim said, if Republicans run somebody younger, like a DeSantis or somebody else, Biden doesn't stand a chance. So I still contend that he's not going to run for a second term. And it ain't going to be Kamala Harris. Gavin Newsom is the only one that we have left, unless we get like an Obama-type figure who comes out of nowhere and like shocks the nation and wins everybody over. Those are their only two chances.
If I may paraphrase Animal House to give a wonderful description of Kamala Harris, a bumbling drunk wine aunt is no way to go through life, Miss Harris.
Wine aunt. That's very good. Well, they have to find a way, though. Look, they have to find a graceful exit with Kamala Harris, because remember why she was selected. It wasn't because let's not go into all the things that she's not. Let's just say that the only thing that she represented was the right demographic profile, a Black woman. So if they're going to toss her off the ticket, there's only two ways to do it. Either Biden dumps her and gets someone else, or somebody else runs and just quietly lets Kamala Harris sort of go out to pasture. But if Kamala Harris runs, it's a certain defeat for the Democratic Party. I mean, I don't care who runs against her. So would Biden, I think it's a good question. If Biden does run again, would he dump Kamala and pick somebody else who might be more appealing now that she's proven completely not up to the job?
Do you mean somebody
Can't dump
more black and more woman?
You can't dump a woman of color unless you replace them with a woman of color or perhaps a trans woman of color. You got to have a
right.
on the woke scale with your replacement.
Well, there is Corinne Jean-Pierre, who does add the added element of being a lesbian and being a foreigner who moved here. So she's got four things going for her. Maybe Corinne Jean-Pierre. Or maybe...
in terms of getting coherent answers, I think the only person worse at giving a straight answer than Kamala Harris, or an understandable answer than Kamala Harris, is Corinne Jean-Pierre. Jeff, what do you think?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. You managed to pick the one black woman who was worse than Kamala Harris. I have to give it to you.
That's a hard thing to do.
Yeah.
At least Jean-Pierre is a black lady. Kamala Harris did not walk around the country as a black woman. She's not a black woman. I don't care what the media says. She's Indian-ish. She's got that pan-racial Benetton color thing happening.
Right. When it benefits her, she identifies as Asian.
Well, look, wait a minute. All of you.
As black. And she celebrates Kwanzaa.
All of you are missing the obvious choice. It's Stacey Abrams. Yeah. She's available now.
She has always been available, Tim, because she continuously loses every election.
Let's see. Do you think Beto O'Rourke will challenge President Biden?
No, I think Tim probably has the right of this, that the only person who could really claim the mantle would be Gavin Newsom. He has, at least as far as Californians are concerned, except for the ones, of course, that have run away by the hundreds of thousands, a good policy background. And as you point out, he's good looking, he's articulate, and he has a very, very good media presence. And
he's got Hollywood looks, let's face it.
He does. But you know the saying, don't you guys? I'm from England, and I know this. Don't California insert your state here. There's 49 other states there, 50 if they get their way over in D.C. But surely that would be the rallying cry, wouldn't it, for every other of the states around the country?
Well, it probably would, but at the same time, you have to say that he can claim to run basically the world's seventh biggest economy, right, in California by itself. So he can say he has the governance, the governing experience, and historically, Americans tend to prefer governors over senators, although that has not been the case lately, of course, with Obama and Biden. They have been exceptions to the rule.
Listeners, let us know what you think. Thanks for listening. Gentlemen, thanks for being here. And that's about all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio America Network. I'd like to say a special thank you to our panel guests, Tim Donner, Scott Cosenza, and Jeff Charles. And last but by no means least, I'd like to thank you, the listeners, for being here in Radioland and for taking the time to join us. I guess my parting shot for this week concerns bias. A notable man of letters, Samuel Johnson, noted that bias and impartiality is in the eye of the beholder. And it's hard to disagree. The left call out right-wing bias and the right call out left-wing bias. And they do seem to both be correct in some ways. The bias exists. It is fairly undeniable. But let us leave with the words of John F. Kennedy as he launched his presidential bid, when he said, "Let us not seek the Republican answer or the Democrat answer, but the right answer. Let us not seek to fix blame for the past. Let us accept our own responsibility for the future." Thanks for listening.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides. Entertaining, informative, and just plain fun. Watch Liberty Nation's The Conservative Five, produced by conservatives for conservatives. C5's The Left Free Zone, hosted by Liberty Nation's
I'm
Lisa K. Donner, joined by a raucous, irreverent panel of authors, deconstructing leftist narratives, debating the hot topics, and remembering to laugh.
Heard it here first.
Join the official conservative safe
You only
space.
did that to piss Jeff off.
Liberty Nation's The Conservative Five.